Welcome everyone, my name is Ryan with Adventure Code Gaming, and I'm here to talk to you today about my pick for Baltimore this weekend, Riptide, Lurker of the Deep.
Beware the depths.
So Riptide has been an insanely fun hero to play since I started playing him a month ago. There's a lot of tricks, maneuvers, and mechanics you can play with, not just regarding his hero abilities, but also regarding some of the new equipment that's in the set. So I definitely feel like he's got definitely his own style compared to Azalea and Lexi as the other rangers in this game. And I wasn't the only one who was testing it here at Adventure Co. Tom had also been playing with a few lists and making a few builds for Riptide since he came out, and he definitely has a very solid list when it comes to playing a more aggressive Riptide, playing what it feels like is almost like a Briar build. Lots of the non-attack free buffs and free arrows to be able to just keep playing for zero pitch hands. Again, reminiscent to the Briar, specifically the Cheerios Briar that was prevalent after Tarek Patel's win at Nationals a couple years ago. So while Tom has crafted a very strong and consistent deck for Riptide, it's not really in the style that I was looking forward to playing him with when I first saw him revealed and started to learn about the cards that he would have and his ability. So I'm deciding to go in a bit of a different route, which is very different from the deck list that I made in my last video. Which could also be kind of equivocated to a Briar list with all the captain's calls and other free buffs that were in that list before. I think Riptide has a lot more to offer and a very unique playstyle for Ranger that he can offer that the other Rangers in this format just can't compare to. I've also realized over the past couple weeks that Riptide, just like other Rangers before him and kind of like decks in general that play a balance of non-attack actions with their attack actions, tends to run into problems against fatigue decks or decks that still just have a decent time defending against what I want to throw at them, since Riptide doesn't have access to dominate abilities or dominated effects like Lexi or Azalea has. So I needed to figure out where Riptide could gain the most value in order to finish off his opponents before they have a chance to fatigue him out or even just kill him. The obvious way that Riptide gains some value from cards compared to the other Ranger heroes is that he deals damage when he activates a trap. So in addition to whatever hindering effect the trap has itself, Riptide also deals damage to his opponent. Now, being able to deal damage on the defense while being able to hinder your opponent in a single card, especially one that's still defense for 3 and has a yellow pitch for most of them, is insane value. That is very rare in this game. Really only Oldham has hindering effects on a lot of his defensive plays. Riptide can consistently and for different matchups prepare different traps and gain a lot of value on the defense while dealing damage. My favorite traps are obviously his specializations, not so much Spike Pit because unfortunately not everyone is guaranteed to play reactions to gain value from that one's full effect, but his Buzzsaw Trap, Collapsing Trap, and I think Boulder Trap are the strongest ones in his arsenal. Collapsing and Buzzsaw are kind of obvious because they just hinder your opponent to such a degree with their one-time effects that you could A, have your opponent lose a lot of cards from their deck just by discarding from Collapsing Trap, or B, waste a lot of their cards from trying to buff a single card that goes down to its normal value when you use Buzzsaw Trap. Boulder Trap is one that I think people may not think about in terms of how much value you get even against aggro matchups, because even if you're minusing armor they wouldn't normally block with, like Mask of Momentum, you have to remember that in the late game stages when both heroes are at 5 or less health, Mask becomes a very strong armor option if it still has both of its armor values. So being able to put some -1 counters on even Blade Break armor is extremely helpful in the late game. You're essentially taking away health from your opponent in addition to the 1 health you deal from Riptide's trigger. The other way I see how we can get value from Riptide's cards, especially his attacks, compared to the other Rangers, is the use of the new buffs that came out in Outsiders called Fletch and Redtail and Fletch and Bluetail. These cards, when you have an aim counter on an arrow, make it so that any cards your opponent defends with in red or blue, respectively, has less defense value. Now, when you have a limited number of attacks in your deck in general as a ranger, being able to lessen your opponent's ability to defend against your attacks just gives them that extra value and gives them that consistency to actually hit that makes it harder for them to just straight up fatigue you. Especially when you have debilitating effects on some of those arrows, you can easily make it so you can reach a late game point where you can finish them off with those cards as well, or just make it so that you have a easier time like defending against their damage when they have something that's hindering them, or when they have less cards in hand after trying to defend it. So even though Riptide can't dominate arrows like the other two rangers can, he still has a way to gain value from these buffs to make it so that his arrows have an easier time hitting when he wants to deal damage. So taking these two things into account, I decided that the best way to play Riptide, or at least the way that I would like to play Riptide and continue to see how well it does, is to play him in more of a control or tempo style, where I'm trying to gain value from playing either single cards while being able to gain enough value from my defense during my opponent's turn, and then being able to save some specific buffs to try and finish them off in the late game once they've let enough damage leak through in little bits and chunks over the course of the game. Traps are an obvious way in which damage will add up over the course of the game. The other way is just by firing simple 0 for 4 arrows or 0 for 4 cards like Snatch in order to gain draw or force a couple cards out of my opponent's hand, making it so they have less cards left in their deck, and it makes it easier for me to defend against whatever they retaliate with during their turn. So cards especially like Endless Arrow, which continuously recycles itself if it hits. Cards like Murkmire Grapnel, which makes it so that they can't reduce the damage or prevent the damage while it's coming in. And other arrows that have mostly the 0 cost are the ways in which I want to deal damage over time for the game. The other way in which I want to gain value is through the aim counter effects that some of the arrows have, like Drill Shots, Barbed Undertow, and Hemorrhage Bore. Being able to use the Barbed Castaway has been insanely fun, and B, adds that extra value so that the arrows that I do fire can have debilitating effects as well as threatening damage. And since they all have the 4 base power breakpoints, the opponent either needs to give up 2 cards, use a single defense reaction, which eventually they'll run out of, hopefully, or use some armor, which hopefully we can either get some damage off of with Drill Shots or using the Boulder Traps to make it so they have less access to those as well. To comment on a few of the cards I mentioned in my last video, Codex of Frailty and Premeditate are definitely still cards I think are worth keeping in just about every Riptide build you can think of. You might take out Premeditate if you really want to go more into the control and tempo path, but I think being able to get a Ponder token to load up your arsenal after you've attacked for the turn is worth putting into the deck and worth threatening your more damage to your opponent for. Plus the reload ability to load arrows for free, like I said, Endless Arrow or some of the other 0 cost arrows, definitely works well with Riptide's ability. Death Touch was another card that I said was a guarantee or must-have in each of your Riptide builds because of how easy it is to load into Arsenal. I actually feel like I have to retract that for this particular type of build, tempo/control style build, because I'm not playing Tunic. Tunic is something that people think is just a guarantee these days on most heroes, since all of their chess pieces just usually lack the consistency and value that Tunic offers over the course of a game. But with this build, where I want to be able to control the flow of my board states or save cards for late game, I feel like Trench of Sunken Treasure is the best chess piece for this kind of build, and I'll explain why. So because I'm using Barbed Castaway to use aim counters and have a little more flexibility with when and what timing I can activate my arrow or bow effects, Trench of Sunken Treasure is insanely invaluable to Riptide because I don't need to worry about cards getting stuck face down in Arsenal until they can be played, or maybe even getting destroyed by something like Command and Conquer. And it also gives me a resource during my opponent's turn if I choose to, so that I can activate my bow's effects at instant speed, either to flip an arrow face up to give it an aim counter if I've played another trap or something from hand to load it into Arsenal, or to even just use the regular load ability to load an arrow face up into arsenal before it passes into my turn for me to fire it for free. There's lots of times where I've drawn off like a ponder token, or had a trap that didn't feel like it was the right time to use against my opponent that I want to save for later, that I was able to save and then also gain a resource from my arsenal in order to play out one of my arrows or activate one of my other cards accordingly. So I definitely think Trench and Barbed Castaway is a combo that is really slept on. Maybe not for the aggro style decks, but definitely for this kind of tempo and control style. The flexibility you have to play so many effects at instant speed and gain resources where you otherwise would just lose a card or have a card stuck in your arsenal just can't be understated. One major thing I do want to mention for this kind of build, and it's not currently in the list that I have on February, which you can see in the link below, but it's definitely something I'm going to try and work in the coming days while I'm preparing for Baltimore, is Codex of Inertia. Now, Codex of Inertia is kind of slept on right now because, again, when you're thinking of more of an aggro mindset, having a random card put into your arsenal doesn't sound great. But when you think about it in a tempo/control style, being able to force your opponent, if they don't already have an arsenal, to arsenal just a random card from the top of their deck and then discard a card from their hand is essentially milling a card from their deck. And when you only have a limited number of attacks in your deck to even try and finish them off, you need to get as many cards out of their deck as possible, as early as possible. If you get, and again, since you have Trench, if you get a crappy card, you can either sink it or just save it there for later, or save it for the next turn when you can sink it whenever to gain the resource, and still get a Ponder token to see if you can arsenal something better from the Codex's effect. So Codex of Inertia, I think, is slept on as a almost basically just like a mill 1 card against your opponent. So those are some of my main thoughts about how I want to play Riptide now, and again, I'm going to have the list for my full deck build in the link below. You might see some changes if you check back regularly over the next couple days as I just switch a few cards out. A few last things I want to mention is how you handle different matchups, because in Baltimore there's going to be like I want to say 3 heroes that my friends and a few other people are predicting are going to be main threats that you need to consider in the Calling, which is Oldhim, Dromai, and Lexi. Oldhim and Dromai both present very unique threats to Ranger in general. Oldhim being able to fatigue and defend without losing cards from their deck very easily, and Dromai being able to build up a board state where they can defend with all but 1 card in their hand, play a red, and then give all their dragons that they built up go again for a turn to deal a significant amount of damage, while Ranger doesn't have a lot of go again cards that they can just give up to destroy dragons. Lexi is the other Ranger to worry about because the ice effects that they can use, the on-hit effects they can use, and just the insane amount of pressure they can put on while being aggressive the entire time is definitely something that can't be underestimated. So those would be the 3 decks to really concern yourself with, or at least that I'm concerned with, going into this weekend. So to help myself out with these matches, I have cards like Give and Take in my sideboard. This is insanely good, and as far as Go Again Majestics go, because it defends 3, it's a 1 for 3, and it recovers a card from my discard pile if they choose to defend with an action. So against Oldhim in the late game, or against any hero in the late game, when they kind of have to defend every card, you can kind of recycle or create an infinite loop recycling give and takes to the top of your deck each time they have to defend with an action card. And if they let it go through, especially against Oldhim, then great, that's damage. You need to get damage on Oldhim in order to win the game. It also helps against Dromai because it's a low-cost go again card that can kill off some dragons, like some more, I guess you could say, threatening dragons like Chromai and Kyloria, making it so that they're less present on your opponent's board for longer than, say, their other dragons. Inertia and Frailty traps are good against both Lexi and Oldhim. Mostly the Inertia against Oldhim and Frailty against Lexi. But there's also plenty of other heroes that these traps work well against. So they're in my sideboard to be used against the specific matchups they work well against. Boulder Trap and the Tar Pit Trap are in my deck because they're yellow at least, defend 3, and if I can trigger them, great. If not, then they still offer enough value that I can use over the course of the game, either through pitching or defending, that they are worth being part of the main deck. I really wanted to include more of the traps, the Pendulum Trap that works on attack reactions, but again, only like 2 heroes react often enough for it to be something to worry about or to have it in the sideboard, and I feel like my matchup against them is not bad already to worry about putting this very specific trap in just for them. So looking into some of those cards, and I'm still messing with the list, like I said, to see what kind of side deck or options I can have against certain builds. Thinking about putting things in like Feign Death against Wizard comboing, or even sometimes Dorinthia second swings. There's also the idea of putting in Down and Dirty against Dromai so that I have an option to arsenal something at the end of turn and still be able to defend with it to break dragons or other Phantasm cards. And just a few other things. Like I said, this deck is still kind of a work in progress, but I also feel confident that I will have at least a good time, if nothing else, playing this at the Calling this weekend in Baltimore. So, yeah, I think that just about wraps up some of my major changes and thoughts going into this weekend. I, of course, will add more in-depth descriptions in my build, like I said, down in the link below, as I make changes or as I kind of like figure out what my sideboard is for the matchups that I expect to go against. But yeah, if you've been playing Riptide, let me know what you think, or let me know what you think of this type of build. But I think if you have a game plan to whittle down your opponent with cards until you get to the late game and save your Fletch and Red and Fletch and Blue Tails for some final damage, I think Riptide has a place in this game playing in this type of style. So yeah, let me know what you think, and I'll update you guys with how I did in Baltimore probably sometime next week with just a quick update video, not something as in-depth as this one was. But yeah, again, thank you for all your support, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will see you next time.
Drag them down.